The previous evening had an unusually pleasant note. For a man who had spent years avoiding attachments, the companionship that had quietly entered Angad's life felt unfamiliar. Yet the feeling remained with him long after Balika had left. The next morning, he awoke inside the pipe with the same heaviness that had become a part of him. His hand moved instinctively towards the cloth bag beside him. Somewhere along the way, the poison had stopped feeling like an escape and had simply become part of the rhythm of his days. Balika noticed, as she always did, but she understood that certain battles could not be fought by anyone except the person trapped inside them. The day already had a purpose. Several kilometers away lay an open field Angad had chosen for that evening's artwork. A place large enough to attract attention and generous enough to reward a good drawing. Balika left and returned at noon carrying rice and fish curry. The aroma filled the narrow pipe almost immediately, transforming the cold concrete shelter into something that felt strangely welcoming. While she ate, Angad arranged his chalks carefully before him, each broken piece carrying more value than its appearance suggested. When she finished, she served him without ceremony. The first few mouthfuls surprised him, not because the food was extraordinary, but because his body accepted it without resistance. After the meal, he stretched himself across the thin mattress and listened to the distant rhythm of passing trains. For a few moments, nothing demanded his attention, nothing threatened to drag him backwards. And somewhere between one passing train and the next, Angad experienced something that he had almost forgotten existed. Peace. At 4 in the evening, Balika woke him. The bag was checked, the chalks counted, the day's plans resumed. While Balika occupied herself with getting ready, Angad quietly returned to the habit that continued tightening its grip on his life. The action was quick, practiced, almost unconscious. By the time they reached the field, the evening crowd had already gathered. Children ran across the open ground, hawkers competed for attention, and the city carried on with the restless energy that never seemed to leave Kolkata. Two familiar boys recognized Angad immediately. Months earlier, they had learned drawing from him, and their excitement remained unchanged. Angad handed each of them a 10-rupee note and watched them disappear into the crowd. Near the exit sat a line of beggars, a sight so common that most people no longer noticed it. Among them was a woman with 2 children. Without thinking very much about it, Angad handed a 50-rupee note to Balika and asked her to give it to the woman. Moments later, she returned with the note still in her hand. The woman had refused it. The response made no sense. A beggar refusing money was not something Angad had ever expected to see. The incident lasted only a few seconds, yet it lingered in his thoughts long after it should have been forgotten. Eventually, he pushed the matter aside and began drawing. But the uneasiness followed him into the pavement. A fierce deity slowly emerged beneath his hands, a figure carrying weapons instead of blessings, a face shaped by fury rather than compassion. The crowd gathered quickly, watching in silence as the image took form. By the time he finished, applause followed almost immediately. The collection exceeded expectations. Notes and coins continued arriving long after the drawing was complete. The 2 boys eagerly helped him gather the money, and Angad rewarded them generously before preparing to leave. Everything should have felt right. The artwork has been successful, the earnings were good, the evening should have ended there. Instead, he found himself looking once again towards the place where the woman had been sitting. The space was empty now. Then he noticed the crowd gathering near the roadside. Something had happened. As he moved closer, the answer revealed itself immediately. The same woman who had refused the money was lying motionless on the pavement. One child sat beside her in stunned silence. The other was nowhere to be seen. An ambulance arrived, a police vehicle followed, the body was taken away, the child was taken away. The crowd slowly dispersed. But the incident refused to leave Angad's mind. On the way to the bus stop, an old beggar called out to him from the darkness. Balika disliked the encounter immediately. Something about the man felt wrong. But Angad walked closer. The old man spoke of disappearances of children vanishing without explanation, of people nobody would miss. Then he revealed a long scar stretching across his side. According to him, there were men operating from nearby slums who treated human beings like commodities. He claimed the dead woman had not simply died, and that the missing child was connected to something much larger. The story sounded unbelievable, yet the certainty in the old man's voice made it difficult to dismiss completely. By the time Balika finally persuaded him to leave, the questions had already taken root. The bus journey home passed in uneasy silence. Balika spoke occasionally, but Angad barely heard her. The old beggar's words continued echoing inside his head. That night, he returned to the Adda. The money from the artwork allowed him to indulge more freely than usual, and he intended to spend the night forgetting everything he had seen and heard. But the old man's story refused to disappear. The dead woman remained in his thoughts along with the missing child, and the strange certainty that connected them all. Then a conversation nearby caught his attention. A group of unfamiliar men sat together speaking in Tamil. Most of it meant nothing to him until one phrase cut through the haze. 10,000 for the boy. The words struck him with unexpected force. The dead woman returned immediately to his thoughts, followed by the missing child, followed by the old beggar's warning. Whether the connection was real or imagined no longer mattered. Something had lodged itself inside his mind, and it refused to leave. Without warning, he stood up and left the Adda. The city stretched endlessly before him, and he kept walking. Hours disappeared, roads appeared and vanished, the night dissolved into fragments. By the time morning arrived, he remembered very little. His hands were swollen, his legs ached, and he could not explain why. Perhaps he had fallen, perhaps something else had happened. He simply did not know. As he returned towards the pipe, he saw Balika hurrying across the railway tracks. The moment she reached him, she noticed his condition. The swollen hands, the exhaustion, the marks he could not explain. Questions appeared in her eyes, questions she never voiced aloud. Before either of them could speak further, she delivered troubling news. There had been another murder. Not one victim this time, 4. The television inside the pipe carried continuous coverage. The details emerging from the investigation shocked the city. The killings were no longer being viewed as isolated incidents. Something larger was unfolding. For weeks, the investigation had continued to expand. BK had shifted his operations to Kolkata and was now staying with Balaton in the government quarters assigned for the case. Yet, despite months of effort, the answers remained frustratingly out of reach. When BK appeared on the television screen, Angad watched with unusual intensity. He remarked that BK was one of the finest officers in the country. The certainty in his voice caught Balika's attention. For a brief moment, she stopped watching the television and started watching Angad. His silence, his reaction to the old beggar, his disappearance during the night, the unexplained injuries, and now his unusual interest in the case. None of it proved anything, yet the questions remained. The television continued speaking, the investigation continued expanding, and the city continued searching for answers. But Angad heard very little of it because he had just realized something deeply unsettling. The drugs had failed. For the first time in a very long time, the high had never arrived, not even a little. Something else had occupied its place, and whatever it was, it refused to let go.
Where stories begin.